Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Wednesday, February 11th, 2015 here. We've got oodles to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. So what should we talk about today? What's important? What's newsworthy? Well, actually, on Fox News, when I got up this morning to check in on world events, they were running a story about how many adults will conceal their love of chocolate from their partners. Oh, yeah, that's important stuff. Absolutely. The connotation is out there. Oh, we're concealing our chocolate addictions. And then, of course, they immediately go back to ISIS all the time. Now, obviously, a big meeting going on over in Minsk. We're not seeing a lot of mentions about it in the U.S. corporate media, but Russia Today is running a streaming update about what's going on. And apparently, just before 7 p.m., Ukraine's President Poroshenko left the negotiating room and just wandered around the second floor for about 15 minutes. Now, that is a tremendous signal right there. He got so angry he had to leave the room. Took him 15 minutes to calm down. And this seems to suggest that the Minsk agreement is not going the way Poroshenko wanted it to, which means it is not going the way the United States wants it to, which may explain the sudden shift in the corporate media away from Ukraine and back to war on ISIS. And I'm expecting it to be announced ISIS is in Yemen any second now. And they're already out there saying, ISIS is already in America. We've got to spy on you more. We've got to throw you in prison without trial and lawyer here just because we think you may have had an ISIS flag someplace in the past here. Now then, apparently the situation in Ukraine is very much turning against the U.S. agenda. We know that the European nations have developed a major case of cold feet at the possibility of outright full-on war once again on their territory. They've already been through it twice. World War I was fought in Europe. World War II, at least partly, was fought in Europe. They're a little bit leery about letting big mistake number 3 happen on their front lawns. And apparently, shortly before this Minsk meeting got underway, and by the way, it's notable that neither Great Britain nor the United States were invited to send a representative. Apparently, Obama telephoned Vladimir Putin and threatened him over Russia's aggression in Ukraine, which is about as real as Saddam's nuclear weapons or Assad's sarin gas. And this is a very alarming display by the president. And apparently he was quoted in an interview as openly saying that the United States needs to twist the arms of other nations with our military might to get them to do what we need them to do. So it's like that casual, yeah, we tortured some folks. He's basically acknowledging that the U.S. is projecting its agenda on the rest of the world through threat of military force. Okay? Now, apparently there was a bit of a kerfuffle where Saakashvili has been appointed as an advisor to President Poroshenko. And this has kind of upset a lot of people, even within Kiev itself. And there is a growing opposition within Western Ukraine and Kiev to Poroshenko. We keep hearing rumblings about a possible military coup against him before these wars really get out of control here. And the propaganda is continuing apace. There was a story over in ENCensorNet.ua. Russia officially acknowledges losing Su-24 bomber near Ukrainian border. Oh, they're flying bombers near that border. See, they're threatening us. Well, not exactly. Because the Sukhoi-24 actually crashed near Volgograd, Russia, the former Stalingrad. It's on the Volga River. It's not actually anywhere near the Ukrainian border unless the globe you're using is 1.5 inches across, and then everything's close to every border. But they're still out there trying to spin the idea that this is all Russia's fault. Even with the United States government admitting, brokering, very polite word for a coup d'etat, the change of government in Kiev a year ago and spending $5 billion to do it. All the subsequent turmoil and blood and death and gore and war, it's all Russia's fault. It's Putin did this. No, he didn't. Now, there's a very alarming development because Representative Mike Rogers, chairman of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Strategic Forces, and Mike Turner, chairman of the Tactical Air and Land Forces Subcommittee, have sent a joint letter to Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel and Secretary of State John Kerry advocating the sending of nuclear weapons to the Russian-Ukraine conflict, along with dual-capable aircraft, which is a polite term for aircraft that can drop either conventional weapons or nuclear weapons. So you've got these two Republicans, who are, of course, far away from the theater of combat, and very close to a taxpayer-funded bunker, in case things really get out of control, literally telling the Defense Secretary and the Secretary of State they want nuclear weapons deployed to be ready to use in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now, remember, and I got into this debate on another interview show last night, for all this talk about Iraq's nuclear weapons or Russia's nuclear weapons or China's nuclear weapons, there is, in all of human history, in the history of planet Earth, 4.5 billion years worth, only one nation has ever actually used nuclear weapons of mass destruction against the civilians of another country. And that is, of course, the United States of America. Now, World War II ended with the nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Hundreds of thousands of people burned alive. And by the way, the nuclear weapons were not needed to end the war. Japan was trying to surrender. Truman dropped those bombs to prove to the world we had them, and were psychotic enough as a nation to actually go ahead and do it. So they could wag the big stick at the rest of the world. And now it looks like they're getting ready to start World War III with nuclear weapons. Now, close friend of President Vladimir Putin has addressed the European Parliament, saying, do not let the United States start sending weapons into Ukraine. It could trigger all-out war. Of course, from the point of view of the White House, that's a good thing. We need a war with Russia. We need to protect the dollar from the ruble, and we've got to have something to blame the declining economy and standard of living in the United States on. Because we're not going to take the blame here in Washington, D.C. and Wall Street. We're not those kind of people. We never take responsibility for what we do. We just look for a scapegoat. And right now, Russia's looking really, really good. Unless Putin does succeed in pulling off this Minsk agreement, and according to one of the German negotiators, they are actually close to some kind of an agreement that will lead to a ceasefire in Ukraine. And I'm sure Obama's going to be throwing ashtrays at the walls of the Oval Office that he didn't get his confrontation with Russia. Poroshenko is still reiterating that if the conflict escalates, and he's doing the escalating, that he will be forced to declare martial law over all of Ukraine. Meanwhile, apparently the Kiev forces shelled another bus station in Donetsk, killing 6, injuring 8. Now, either those Kiev forces are really lousy shots, or they are targeting civilians. Because a bus station is really not considered a military asset to pretty much anybody in the world. Meanwhile, Russia's emergency ministry is preparing a new humanitarian aid convoy for Donbass and for Luhansk. So they're sending in food and Band-Aids and all that other stuff. We got to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, as I mentioned before, the United States and Great Britain were not invited to the meeting in Minsk, even though it's being called the Normandy Four. Two of the participants in Normandy were basically uninvited because it's known the U.S. and U.K. are all in favor of kicking off a new major war all across Europe. And Europe is really not interested in that. So apparently Obama is now in contact with British Prime Minister David Cameron, insisting that Britain must now spend more on defense. And Obama is asking Cameron to commit to spending 2% of the national income on defense. And if he doesn't, it will set a bad example for the rest of Europe, who are very reluctant to spend the kind of money on the military that the United States does, which comes to something like 67 cents out of every tax dollar collected, goes to the machinery of mass death, mayhem, and torture across the globe. Now, at this point, Great Britain is not sending weapons to Ukraine. However, Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond, addressing Parliament yesterday, said Britain reserves the right to send weapons at some future time, should they so choose, or the U.S. twist their arm to do it. Which we now know is what Obama's policy is. And there's an article right out of Russia Today where Obama has said the reality of American leadership involves twisting the arms of nations which don't do what we need them to do. And the U.S. relies on its military strength to achieve its goals. This is like when Obama said, yeah, we tortured some people. Obama is basically admitting that the U.S. is enforcing its will on the rest of the world through threat of military force. That's not democracy. It's not even a republic. That is a military dictatorship. That's an empire. All righty. So, Obama has apparently sent the draft of his new war authorization up to Congress. And it calls for a 3-year authorization of force against ISIS, notably 1 year longer than Obama himself will be in that Oval Office. Kind of an interesting little signal. And a lot of people in Congress are very leery about this because under the Constitution, only Congress can declare a war. And Obama's draft resolution is very, very vague. And Obama is defending that by saying, well, we're going to have to go wherever ISIS is. And so there are no geographical limits on this war authorization. If Congress is insane enough to pass this, it will give the President of the United States of America the authority to launch an attack against any other nation on earth simply by saying, oh, ISIS is in there. Look, we have a picture that provided to us from Site Intelligence Group of 2 guys with an ISIS flag standing on the Eiffel Tower. Oh, look, they're on the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Oh, my goodness, they're in China's Forbidden City. They're standing on the Kremlin. There's ISIS in Liechtenstein. There's ISIS standing on the Sydney Opera House. It's an open-ended authority, a carte blanche for Obama and whoever follows him into the White House to simply start wars on their own authority. Stroke of a pen, major bloodshed. And it is creating some resistance in Congress. Now, the Republicans are all gung-ho for this. The GOP never met a war they didn't like, but a lot of Obama's Democratic support in Congress, they're not cool about this at all. They think it's a big, big, big mistake. And Obama's out there saying, ISIS is going to lose. Well, that's a little bit reckless when you're talking about having made up an enemy that doesn't really have a home base, doesn't have a national infrastructure that you can target. It's just guys in black pajamas and a flag popping up here and there. Basically, I think ISIS is another gigantic hoax like Al-Qaeda, and Obama wants the authority to play whack-a-mole by having some actors with an ISIS flag pop up in a country he wants to attack. Oh my goodness, they're in Germany now. They're in Spain. ISIS is in all the oil-producing nations and all the gold-producing nations. We have to invade over there. We're seeing articles like this one over here in The Guardian, the British press, saying this is permission for Obama to extend these wars outside Iraq and Syria, to just go wherever he feels like going. And all he's got to do is get a couple of people inside a targeted country to stand up with an ISIS flag and say, we're ISIS, come and get us, here we are. And they're really ramping up the propaganda, trying to sell that ISIS is this evil threat we must confront. Over at CBS, And this was also being carried on Fox News. They have this story. According to a United States government intelligence official, who remains anonymous, I might add, and who basically their career is lying to everybody. You're saying 20,000 foreign fighters are flocking to Syria and Iraq to join ISIS. How can they possibly know this? I mean, it isn't like these guys are going through customs at the airport and the customs guy says, oh, why are you traveling to Syria? And the guy says, I'm going to join ISIS. They're going to say, I'm visiting family, friends. I'm there on business. I'm taking a vacation. I love bomb craters. Got a Facebook page of famous bomb craters from around the world I've taken pictures of. They just made up this number. Accountants will tell you, never trust a number that ends in a 0 or a 5. It's probably a fake. And I think ISIS is just 200 guys in a video production unit that has been set up to create an absolutely unreachable, untraceable enemy to be used as an excuse for Obama to twist the arms of every other nation on planet Earth. Bring them back to Bretton Woods. Bring them back to the petrodollar. Fox News was running an interview on an ex-FBI agent here not too long ago saying, ISIS-trained fighters are already in America. There are sleeper cells. There are lone wolves. Be afraid. Don't even dare look under your bed. They're trying to hamp the fear. Okay, well, if ISIS is already in America, and you know that for a fact, and given that they are now enemies of the United States, why haven't you arrested them? It doesn't make sense that you know for a fact these ISIS terrorists are on the ground in the United States of America and you haven't grabbed them already. Civil rights and rule of law hasn't bothered you yet. You've been grabbing innocent people and torturing them to death to find weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist. They're just making this stuff up. They're out there trying to find some way to scare you so that you stop thinking, so that you start believing what you're told to believe. If you're a loyal, patriotic American, you will smell this bovine excrement and you will believe it's good. All righty, we got to take a break for commercials. I know we've got a caller waiting on the line. I'm going to get to you just as soon as we're back from these words from our sponsors. America, welcome back to the show here. Now, as you know, over in Yemen, bit of a foreign policy whoopsie for the United States. The U.S.-friendly government has been kicked out by the Yemenite people. We're seeing this happen all across the globe. Thailand, now Yemen. And Britain, France, and the United States closed their embassies in Yemen because if they had waited one more day, they would have been forcibly kicked out. And now the deserted U.S. embassy has been seized by the people. No big shock there. And Fox News was trying to make a big deal out of the fact that those Yemenis are stealing our embassy vehicles. Yeah, that sort of thing does happen. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Roseanne in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
Oh, hi, Michael. The reason I'm calling, I wanted to say that I heard Obama on the radio just probably an hour ago on his war powers request. And my assessment is that it's a pretext to get into Jordan and fight the Assad army. And I believe our country is getting desperate right now, and I'll go on the assumption, I truly believe the Ukrainian conflict is going to be under control, okay? I believe that's what's coming out of this meeting with the Europeans. Mm-hmm. And this is why Obama right now is in a desperate move, has to checkmate Putin in Syria, because he lost it in Ukraine. And the reason he has to go, Obama wants to get into Syria is because there's a pipeline running from Iran, Iraq into Syria, okay, to supply the Europeans.
Yes.
And the Americans want to get that gas line to compete with, to cut off Putin in Europe.
I'm not sure how much of the European gas is actually going through that pipeline. Last I heard, it's actually in a rather serious state of repair ever since the Iranian Revolution of 1979. And I don't think this is just about Syria or Jordan. Yeah, even the articles in the corporate media are saying this war authorization is a license for Obama to attack any country, twist their arm, that doesn't do what the U.S. tells them to do.
I agree with you, but right now he's in Jordan. He has Jordan in there, and they're going to go into Syria to grab that pipeline to they'll fix up that line to compete with Russia. whether it's in disrepair, but that's the goal, and that's why he says ground combat operations in limited circumstances if our allies are incapable. Jordan is incapable of fighting Syria. So we're going to come right in and do the job.
Well, I think you're misreading the rationale. I think you're misreading the rationale because the war authorization says the U.S. has a right to invade any country to deal with ISIS if the government of that country can't deal with them. So what Obama is really talking about is we have a right to go into Syria even if the Syrian government doesn't want us there because ISIS must be confronted and dealt with. And that's why this whole ISIS hoax is a license for the U.S. to declare war on any country, even if they're supposedly allies and friends.
But the focus is Syria now. That's where the heart of the IMF and everybody else needs that gas pipeline to stay alive.
Well, I think Syria is an immediate objective. They've been trying to get rid of Assad for 4 years now, but it's certainly
haven't been able to. No, they haven't been able to.
But it's certainly not the end. It's not the end of this agenda. The end of this agenda is Iran and war with Russia and war with China. That's what they're after, because without that, you've got BRICS are turning away from the U.S. dollar. The Shanghai Cooperative Organization is turning away from the dollar. You've got even our friend Egypt is now doing bilateral trade with Russia without going through the U.S. dollar.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
No, why would you need a war with Russia if you can cut off Putin's gas to Europe?
Well, they tried that already, and first of all, Russia can sell its gas to other countries. And Russia is already building a new pipeline that's going through Turkey.
Yeah, but we want to control Europe, and they can do that right now.
Well, Europe is already showing a lot of reluctance to cut their own energy supplies to please the United States. I mean, that's been a big part of why Europe...
Well, let's watch and see what they do.
Okay, well, we'll watch and see what they're going to do here. But the problem is, once you're down in Syria... there's no extension of that pipeline to Europe. You've got to carry everything through tankers and LNG carriers, and that actually slows down the throughput.
Well, like I said, Mike, let's see what they do.
All right.
And let's see if that pipeline works.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Peter in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Michael. I just was going to call and find out. Have you found whatever the reason was that your website got knocked out the other day?
Well, originally it was taken down because somebody claimed a DOS attack was being launched from my server, and I spent all the money for a security scan, and during that they upgraded me to PHP 5.4, which has broken significant parts of my website. Big pain in the neck. And when it was all over and done with, they didn't find any evidence that my site had been compromised or was hosting malware. Somebody was doing a spoofed IP attack on somebody downstream, and they were using my IP as the spoofed ID in order to trick the hosting company into shutting me off. It's just one of these typical dirty tricks that we're seeing from people who are basically admitting up front they can't win the debate on the facts, law, and logic, so they got to play dirty to get what they want.
Who's the one who claimed that you were under whatever it was you said was under that?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to look, but as far as I'm concerned, they're an innocent party in this as well, because they got a huge number of packets onto their server that appeared to be coming from my server, and but at this point, it was somebody's, cyber warrior working for Israel, working for the U.S. military, working for whoever. We live in an age of dirty tricks. The governments believe their divine right to use dirty tricks to maintain their control and authority over the people.
Well, a couple of years ago, Mike, you I remember put something on your website that I put the hard drive. I was what to happen if your thing ever goes off. Do you remember doing that?
You're talking about accessing my website through the direct IP, because my server is specifically configured. It doesn't use virtual domain naming, so I have an IP that only goes to my website.
Well, yeah, whatever that was. Unfortunately, I've changed computers since then, so I wasn't able to do that. But is that still functional? Is that still a way around this?
Well, that's functional, but when my server is disconnected, even the IP won't work. And my next task is, unfortunately, because they migrated me to PHP 5.4, I'm waiting for the Drupal 8 release to get out of beta, and then I'm going to basically have to rebuild my website from the ground up again and migrate as much across as I can. It's going to be a huge amount of work, huge amount of time that I would rather be spending stopping the war. And all of this, of course, because the security threats are out there. And if you look at this huge volume of lost productivity that we're all going through to keep the cyber criminals at bay, this is a clear and present danger to our nation's economy. And yet the NSA just doesn't think it's important to go out and find the cyber criminals. They're too busy keeping an eye on the interesting people. And it almost reminds me of the Dark Ages, when the church and the government couldn't actually solve the real problems, like the Little Ice Age and the plague. So they made up an imaginary enemy, the witches, and they tortured some people to get confessions, and they burned them at the stake and said, see, we're working to make a better world. Keep on giving us your money and your obedience. And they're playing the same game today. They can't stop the cyber criminals. They can't stop the fact that we're going into a new Little Ice Age, but they've got terrorists to wave at us, and they're going to slap the terrorists around to prove how much we need them and should go on giving them money and obedience. Okay?
Well, okay, but
we got to take a break for a commercial. Okay? All right. So thank you very much for the phone call. Sorry to cut you off, and we'll be back. We've got another caller waiting on the line after these few words. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And during the break, I'm putting up a whole bunch of stories about this Canadian lawsuit to force the government of Canada to go back to interest-free loans from the Bank of Canada, as is required by its charter. I am getting all these emails from people in Canada saying the story is absolutely blocked in Canada. The Canadian government has told the Canadian media, do not report this. It's certainly not getting any play in the U.S. media. And now apparently the website that was where all these people were organizing and spreading information, CanadianAwareness.org, is now showing as available for sale from GoDaddy. So it looks like their website got taken down. Talk about obvious signs of a dictatorship. So we're going to keep this story alive here, but push comes to shove. When it comes to continuing to take money away from the taxpayers under any excuse, there are no rules. There are no laws. Whatever keeps the money flowing to the money junkies is all that really matters. All right, we're going to grab ourselves another phone call here. Robert down in Texas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I had a JFK question. If you could explain to me briefly the situation between Tippit, Oswald, and the movie theater. Why would Oswald have left downtown Dallas, gone to Oak Cliff to a movie theater? And I assume an Oswald lookalike shot Tippit. What do you think?
Well, it's all very blurry here. One of the witnesses to the Tippit shooting said there were actually two guys, and that shot Officer Tippit. It's actually not definitive that Oswald did walk all the way back to his house in Oak Cliff. That was done in order to put him in position to be the shooter of Tippit, and also to change his shirt, which it turned out he didn't really do that, because the shirt Oswald was wearing when he was arrested matches exactly the shirt that he was photographed wearing at street level in front of the book depository as Kennedy was shot in the throat, the James Altgen photo.
That was found under the Tippett's police car, wasn't it?
What was found under Tippett's police car?
A windbreaker that Oswald...
Well, you know, it was really a long time ago, but at this point it's pretty obvious that there was a conspiracy and there was a cover-up. And, you know, we've got things that we need to really talk about that are taking place today, if you don't mind. So with all due respect, you know, I do have a page full of JFK information at my website you can take a look at. But thank you very much for the phone call, and we're going to get on back here to the 21st century here. Very interesting article out of RINF.com. Why would an anti-war activist back arms sales? And they're basically talking about the fact that John Kerry's early political fame and traction was based on his being a peace activist, came out of the war in Vietnam and said, this is all wrong, and he's had that reputation. Now, all of a sudden, He's Secretary of State, and he's all gung-ho for arms sales because they make money, and who knows where his stock portfolio is invested. All righty, let's see. We're seeing more and more commentary related to the burning of that Jordanian pilot in the cage. And by the way, the story is going around that the reason he didn't seem to react all much is that the actors, for lack of a better word, who put him in that cage, had drugged him very, very heavily. Possibly as an act of mercy. He wasn't going to feel what was going on, and that's why he didn't seem to really react appropriately. But that being said, we're seeing all these articles that are pointing out, why are we being told to be upset about this one man burned alive in a cage? And there's a story at firstlook.org talking about this 13-year-old boy in Yemen who was burned to death last month by a U.S. drone. Well, if burning the Jordanian pilot, who was taking part in a war which carries risks of death, is important, then so was this innocent 13-year-old boy who wasn't a combatant, just standing around his home, burned alive. And as we pointed out on our show before, the U.S. does not really have any moral standing to scream about burning pilots in a cage. When you go back and you look at the firebombing of Dresden, the firebombing of Fallujah, the firebombing of Tokyo, and the nuclear weapons over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, anyway here. Now, we've been hearing all over the European press about the dramatic rise in anti-Semitism in Great Britain. Oh, my goodness, the anti-Semites are on the march. The Jews are afraid. We've got to have special protections. And there's a very interesting article over at Gilad Atzmon's website where he's actually taking a look at the data presented to prove anti-Semitism is on the rise. And he says how they're tallying it up is being designed to produce a maximum result. And when they're talking about incidents of anti-Semitism, they're just talking about whenever anybody says, oh, I was called a dirty Jew by this person, oh, that counts as an incident. Whether it happened or not, because they don't investigate all these things. Somebody says I was called a bad name, they mark it as an incident. They don't investigate it to find out if it actually happened. But Israel right now is trying to regain their perpetual political shield of being the world's greatest class of victims. And they've really burned it out. They've burned it out. They're still trying to wag Hitler and the Holocaust and the Nazis, and all that stuff happened before we were all born. We have atrocities taking place today, here and now, right before us, that we can do something about. We can't do a thing about what happened in World War II Germany before we were born, and we're not responsible. And we're not guilty for what happened before we were born. We are guilty for failing to act against genocides and aggressions today. Now, Kayla Mueller, earlier in the week, was being wagged around as the bloody shirt, oh, bad ISIS, bad ISIS, bad ISIS. We reported yesterday how this Rear Admiral over at the Pentagon was quoted in the Associated Press saying that they're absolutely sure that she was not killed in a Jordanian airstrike. They're absolutely sure ISIS simply murdered her. They don't know how or why or when. Well, if ISIS deliberately murdered her, where's the video? I'm sure Site Intelligence Group is trying to gin one up right now as I speak these words here. But apparently, there was another side to this issue because a lot of Israel's supporters came out, basically saying, oh, she deserved it. She was over there in Palestine. She was trying to help the Palestinians. And so the use of Kayla Mueller as a propaganda tool has apparently fizzled rather dramatically, and I don't even think I've seen her mentioned once this morning on Fox News. Now, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu is on a 3-day trip to Latin America. He's visiting Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. And I think this is very, very significant because the economic predations of the private central banks are on the verge of driving Greece and the eastern Ukraine into alliances with Russia. Also, to a lesser degree, Egypt. The same thing could easily happen with Venezuela. And Russia is defeating the U.S. agenda for the very simple reason that Russia's making deals, while the U.S. threatens to make war. And other countries and other people, they're always going to prefer the path to peace. Peace through commerce, peace through trade, prosperity through trade. Not surrender your wealth at the point of a drone strike. Now, as I mentioned before, Thailand's U.S.-friendly government has been given their pink slip, and the United States government is now dismissing and denying rumors that the former Thai Prime Minister, Yingluck Shinawatra, is seeking asylum in the United States, as so many of these failed puppet dictators tend to do. I remember we used to have Ferdinand Marcos. Actually, his wife Imelda was living here on Oahu for a while, which brought great joy to the shoe stores all over the shopping malls and everything here. Apparently down in India, they've had a major upset in their elections where this fringe political party that is anti-banker, anti-austerity, swept the elections. Major, major upset. Apparently caught a lot of people by surprise, including the people who won. Alrighty, we're coming up here on our top of the hour news break, and when we come on back, more about economy, more about Russia's building bridges while the U.S. tries to bomb them. And we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. The latest word we're getting from Minsk is that the Normandy 4 have taken a break for dinner, but it's now expected the talks will continue into tomorrow. And they're still making all the polite noises about they're making progress. It's a long discussion. Apparently, Christine Lagarde is going to make an announcement about immediate emergency financial aid for Ukraine. Well, it's not really financial aid. It's another loan to shackle the Ukrainian people into permanent banker slavery. And I'm still getting emails from people in Canada saying they absolutely cannot view any of the links on this story that we're posting at our website. That they're either getting a warning saying, oh, this is harmful to your computer, or it's simply declared not available in your area. The bankers don't want you to see your slave chains. Alrighty, we're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. We're going to go with Helen in Massachusetts. Aloha, welcome to the show. What is on your mind? Helen, are you there? Let me try the button again. Helen, are you there? Okay, Helen, I cannot hear you. I'm going to put you back on hold, and we're going to go over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Okay, I'm not hearing any of the phone calls for some strange reason today. Dustin, are you there? Okay, I'm not hearing any of the phone calls. I'm going to put Dustin back on hold while we try and figure out why our phone system has decided to quit working. But don't hang up, Dustin and Helen. We'll try and figure out what the heck is going on over there. Now then, the Greek and Russian foreign ministers are meeting to discuss finance, energy cooperation, and parenthetically, the Ukraine crisis. And it's another indication that the EU's hardline approach to Greece, that by golly they will pay the debt on the schedule we tell you to pay it, because we can't cut you any slack without the rest of the European Union wanting some slack, is putting pressure on Greece to leave the European Union and the euro and potentially align with Russia, which would totally derail the whole U.S. policy of encirclement of Russia. And Greece could very easily simply say, we refuse to deal with that debt that was created with that fraud between Papandreou and Goldman Sachs. And if they default on that debt, you've got that whole exposure on derivatives they're going to come due. All right, we're going to try and see if the phone calls are working again. Helen, are you there?
Yes.
Ah, good. Okay, I guess it all came back here. So, Helen, what's on your mind?
I have a question for you. On this aid worker that was killed, where did she get all the money to get over there? First to go to India, then to go to France, then to go to North Africa, then to go to the Turkey-Syria border.
I have to be honest and say I don't know, but we know there's a lot of aid workers traveling the globe that are supported by various aid organizations. Some of them just have their own family money, and they go out and want to do good with it. But I don't really know. But at this particular point, her track record was, very sterling in terms of trying to do good and deal with some of the violence that was going on over there. One of the reasons that Israel supporters are coming down on her is she was active in trying to block demolition of homes in the West Bank, which is, of course,
yes,
what got Rachel Corrie got killed.
I understand that.
Okay.
But is her family that wealthy?
I don't.
That is a lot of money.
I don't know the source of her funding. Okay. All we have is her track record of what she was doing. And we have this backlash today from Israel supporters that she's not worthy of our concern because she was trying to help the Palestinians. Okay?
Okay, but I'm just suspicious because too many of USAID are fronts for the CIA.
Was she connected with USAID?
I don't know.
Well,
they're not very definitive about where her funding came from.
Okay, so that all we can say that we know is that we don't really know, but I'll take a look into it, and I agree with you about USAID. They're now being kicked out of a lot of countries for sponsoring subversive activity against the indigenous government. So thank you very much for the phone call, Helen, and we're going to see if Dustin in New Jersey is on the line. You there, Dustin?
Yeah, hi, Mike.
All right, good. We got our phone lines back. What's on your mind?
Make sure you keep Pussy Riot out of the countries, too.
Yeah. Oh, that was so absurd.
The woman who called before this lady, she was partially right about the Syrian pipeline, but people need to go to Greg Manarino's site. This is about resources with the debt, and they really need Russia and China because all roads through Syria and Iran lead to Russia and China, and they got to knock them out of the ballpark because of the BRICS. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, and ultimately it all goes back to the money and perpetuating the reign of the private central bankers. This clash of civilization, you keep hearing that little catchphrase, and it really is a war between private central bankers and public banking. That is the core of all of these wars all over the globe.
And I just want to say, this isn't over yet because the peace process is just like a facade in terms of the neocons got a lot of different ways to get around moving arms in secretly.
Oh, well, the peace process is just a theater play that's put on for the public to convince us that our government really doesn't want war, even though, they're staining the front of their Armani suits with all the drool that's leaking out from between their fangs about how eager they are to see other people bleed to death.
I like when you said that we blow up bridges and Russia is building bridges, and that's absolutely right. When him just going to Egypt, and we're still trying to get the TPP put together, and Putin's been around. Look at all the deals they made in the last few months.
Well, they're making all these deals, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Trade Deal are running into brick walls because what the U.S. is suggesting is basically corporatization of government power, trying to force these countries to buy America's GMO products, and these countries don't want them. Russia simply going out and saying, what have you got I want to buy? What do I have you want to buy? Let's make a deal. That's it. That's how you do the business. And the U.S. is trying to weaponize these trade agreements to enforce their hegemony around the world. And the rest of the world, they see what the United States has become. Even if the American people don't yet realize what the U.S. government has become, the rest of the world sees it. They've been seeing it for the last 30, 40 years with all these covert overthrows and coups d'etats. They know what the U.S. is really about.
Yep. All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thank you very much for the phone call. Now, interesting article out of Blacklisted News. Grave repercussions for NATO if Greece turns to Russia. This was only a couple of weeks ago I said this might be a possibility, and now everybody is saying, yeah, it absolutely could come about. And apparently one of the Greek politicians, Kamenos, member of the Independent Greeks, who was part of the coalition, is basically saying Plan B is to get funding from another source. And say it could be the United States, could be Russia, could be China. I think it's going to be Russia. Russia's already extended the offer. Russia makes very generous terms. That's why Ukraine decided to drop merging with the EU and go with Russia, and that is when the U.S. went in and overthrew the government, to drag them into the EU, drag them into perpetual debt slavery to the ECB. Article out of Market Daily News. It's only a matter of time before Greece exits the euro. Now, there's the music. We got to take a break for commercials. More about Greece and the euro after we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I just posted a video to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. Somebody was shooting a video of the Kiev military recruiters in the town of Velikaya Znamenka, notifying all the men of the village that they are to report for military service, and going on saying Crimea was taken from us illegally by force last March. And this woman grabs the microphone and says, "We know you are lying. We are tired of war. We are tired of the junta." And the crowd is cheering as she does this. So Poroshenko does not have the trust, faith, and support of his own people close to home. And we keep hearing these rumors of a potential military coup against him, which would absolutely slam everything shut here. All right, we're going to take another phone call here. John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome back to the show. What is on your mind today?
Aloha, Michael. Glad you received that video of the young woman in an unpronounceable name in Ukraine, taking the military recruiters on. Yeah, it was quite an eye-opening piece.
You know what? Even before she grabbed the microphone, just looking at the face of the military recruiter, it was obvious he's not even believing the stuff. He didn't want to be there. He's just going through the motions and saying the words. And when she took the mic, he didn't really resist her all that much. And the crowd is just cheering about. We need that kind of courage here in the United States of America. We need Americans to have the courage when the politicians and the bankers are lying to us. We need to have the courage to say, "We know you're lying. We know you are full of it. We've had enough. Go away."
Well, now turning to the Greek situation and this, what looks likely to be a pivot to Russia. It's already happened in one of the Greek provinces called Cyprus, this partitioned island with Greeks and Turks. Well, we know that the Turks are sort of looking favorably on Russia because of this new pipeline going into the country.
Yes.
And now we're getting the Greeks in Cyprus offering Russia a warm water naval air station. So what we're seeing is that America's lake, called the Mediterranean, soon won't be America's lake.
Yeah, and it really comes down to the fact that America's approach to the rest of the world is still rooted in the imperial mindset of World War II, and the modern world doesn't respond to that anymore. They don't respect it. Yes, the world is afraid of America's weapons of war, except that they don't really seem to work all that well anymore, and they're hideously expensive. So, Russia's making deals. The U.S. is making war. Who do you think the world is going to line up with? Peace. Peace through commerce. Peace through trade.
And I find it rather interesting that this political party in India has appeared out of nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. Nobody had even hardly heard of them. And they've taken now a huge chunk out of India.
And we're seeing the same thing getting ready to happen in Spain and Italy, where their anti-austerity, anti-banker parties are showing huge gains in the polls ever since Syriza won in Greece. And remember, this was the second time Syriza won in Greece. The first time, the pro-banker party refused to form a coalition government to force a second election, which was just flat out stolen by the money junkies to keep their talons in the throats of the Greek people. But this time Syriza won by enough of a majority where even the vote rigging could not deny them.
Yeah, well, we're looking forward now to 2016 and America's election. We'll see what happens there. See if a party can come up.
Well, see, we're only allowed to have two parties in this country. Third parties are tolerated graciously, but the system is rigged against them. The way the laws are written, third parties have a tremendous uphill battle just to get on the ballot in all the 50 states. If you're the candidate of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, you're automatically on the ballot in all 50 states. But if you are the candidate of a third party, you have to mount petition drives in all 50 states to get on the ballot, and that is a huge expense in time, money, and volunteers, and it's designed to prevent third-party candidates from ever getting on the ballot. And with all these electronic voting machines, even if they could get on the ballot, it's still going to be stolen. We're not going to have a Syriza in the United States until we get honest elections back.
Well, yeah, I mean, the honest elections. Basically, the way I view it, American elections are just basically a huge public opinion poll, and then
they're not even that. They're not even that. It's another theater production to convince us that we still have some say about the way the country is being run, but we don't. We're completely disenfranchised.
Yeah, well, it looks weird to me, but things are happening all over the planet. UKIP in the UK, these new political parties are springing up all over Europe.
Well, they're all aligned with ISIS, and that means Obama can now declare war on them. They really are getting desperate. The private central bankers are realizing that their 300-year history of plundering planet Earth for their own wealth may be coming to an end. And they are willing to start world wars to keep it going. But the next world war may be the people of planet Earth against the private central banks.
Well, it's looking really dire for the UK-USA alliance. Everything they try seems to have a reverse Midas touch to it.
Yeah, well, I don't know about what's going on in the British government, but definitely in Washington, D.C., the quality of thinking is really very poor. And maybe that's because anybody who's really got any brains knows better than to get tangled up in Washington, D.C. But they get an idea into their head like, we'll crash oil prices, that will hurt Russia, and they stop thinking at that point. And then they implement the policy, and it backflashes on Canada's economy, Alaska's economy, the shale oil industry, Venezuela, Europe. Causes more damage to us than it did to Russia, and that's why they're letting oil prices start to go back up now. But they don't think these things all the way through. They just get this harebrained idea, if we do this, that will happen. And they don't really think it all the way through for its ramifications.
Well, I think this oil price crash, engineered of course, will be pointed to in future times as the beginning of the global economic collapse.
Maybe. I mean, they're starting to let the oil prices go back up. John, I'm going to have to let you go here. We have to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much for the phone call, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors with 2 more phone calls waiting on the line right now. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here now. This morning when I turned on my computer, I got the Black Tuesday updates on the Windows 7 machine, 16 patches, resulting in like 21,000 changes. And apparently it's only a few hours after the Black Tuesday patches are going out, and already there are reports that Visual Studio is now freezing computers all over the place. They're just locking up because of the patches. I mean, Microsoft puts out operating systems that are buggy to get them on the market and make some money. Then they start putting out patches to fix it, and they can't even make the patches reliable. This is why we need to restore product liability to computers and software, so that those of us who are financially harmed by the poor quality software systems, hardware systems that are being put onto the market have a recourse to incentivize a better quality product. Right now, computer makers are just like the vaccine makers. They can sell you anything at all. You can't do a thing about it. All right, we're going to grab 2 more phone calls here. Clint in Nevada. Aloha, Clint. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I know you've had some computer issues, so I figure you might be a little busy. I wanted to ask if you knew anything about this explosion in Donetsk, Ukraine. that's been on the web. INFOWARS covered it, and they just don't know quite what to make of it. They were talking about maybe we want to keep our eye on radiation monitors around the world and see if our radiation monitor just doesn't work anymore. It's a very impressive explosion. It's all over YouTube.
Yeah, I've seen it on YouTube, and it was sent to me. It's a powerful explosion. The video is glared out because apparently there was a low-level cloud, low-lying clouds right over it that reflected the light back down and made it seem a lot brighter than it otherwise would have been. My understanding is that they hit a chemical plant, which is what triggered the explosion. But at this point, Poroshenko would be out of his mind to use a nuclear weapon because I'm sure that a lot of people in that part of the world have radiation meters dating back to the Chernobyl incident, probably a lot more of them following Fukushima. So at this point, until somebody actually gets up there and shows me some melted green glass that's, and some radioactive readings, I think it's just a very powerful conventional explosion that triggered a secondary in this chemical plant.
INFOWARS, they showed a newsreel of the crater, and it was in a forest. There was no chemical plant wreckage around, and that's the extent of my knowledge of it.
Well,
so
then it was a very, very powerful conventional bomb. They could have been a fuel air explosive bomb, but if the crater's in the middle of a forest, then they got lousy aim.
Yeah. Well, they were talking about maybe a demonstration, or that sounds pretty crazy to me, though.
Yeah, if they're saying demonstration, they do have lousy aim, and they're trying to save face.
Yeah, I'll let you go, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to go to Cameron in the United Kingdom. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Good afternoon to you. Michael, just regarding the phone call that you had with John previous to the prior phone call that you had. He mentioned UKIP as an alternative. It's not. It's just there they are conservatives on steroids. The same people who actually fund conservatives, they fund them. The same people who started all this nonsense of austerity and everything. I mean, this person, Nigel Farage, he's a merchant banker. He used to be a merchant banker. He came directly from the city. It's like putting somebody from Goldman Sachs to start a party and they say, well, this is an alternative. It's not. It's just basically to hurt people, to hurt the people who are unsatisfied with this current thing, to a new basically mirage of a party. And they are nothing like Syriza. Nothing at all. Just
well,
that big point.
I think the sentiment is that the people are ready for a Syriza, and as far as Nigel Farage having previously been a banker, it doesn't mean he's not capable of changing his priorities as he gets older. I mean, we see all these people like Colin Powell, who went up to the United Nations and lied about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction with his little fake vial of anthrax, and then years later he turns around and says, I wish I hadn't done that. That was not a good thing to do. People change as they get older. Their value systems change. And I wouldn't write off the fact that Nigel, who grew very rich off being a merchant banker, has realized that the core principles of that bank are actually destructive to the society as a whole. I had a very good friend who lived very close to us here, who spent his whole life as a banker. But he was retired, and we had a lot of discussions in which he said, yeah, the way it's set up, it's actually very destructive. So, we'll keep an eye on UKIP and Nigel Farage. I'm not ready to dismiss him out of hand at this particular point, though.
I understand. It's just a matter of the donations, the same people who donate to conservatives, they donate.
But those people donate to everybody so that they can control the outcome regardless of what the voters say and do. But every once in a while, you'll get somebody like a John F. Kennedy who'll take the donated money and make all kinds of promises. Then when he gets the job, he says, I think I'm going to do what's right, which is, of course, why he got killed. Okay?
I hope so, Michael.
All right.
I hope so. Thanks ever so much for
the time. All right. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, getting on back to Greece. Story here, Market Daily News. It's only a matter of time before Greece exits the euro. And both sides are just taking a hard line. Both sides are basically playing chicken. They're waiting for the other side to flinch. But the difference is the European Union and the European Central Bank, they don't have a fallback position. Greece does, going to Russia. And again, the European Union and the ECB are in a very difficult place. They can't give Greece any relief on the debt, or every other member state of the EU is going to say, we demand the same. So that's why the EU and the ECB are taking this hard line. And this hard line is basically going to push Greece out of the EU. So ISIS is now in Greece. We have to bomb Syriza, their secret liaisons, whatever they're going to say. And Paul Craig Roberts was saying he would not be surprised if the Greek government was subject to assassination, because the money junkies know no morality other than keep the wealth flowing from the people to us. That's it. That's all they ever care about. That's their religion. That's their philosophy. That's their core principle. It's their prime directive. Keep the wealth flowing from the people to our pockets. How do you think the Rothschilds got worth $15 trillion with nothing but ink and paper? Now, we've been hearing over the last couple of months about how Russia could be cut off from the SWIFT system, which is the global economic electronic transfer system. And the U.S. has been saying, we're going to kick Russia out, we're going to do this, it'll cause them all kinds of harm, and Russia was saying, yes, it's a problem, and started developing a parallel system. But apparently, over at in Europe, European sources are saying this was never discussed. Nobody actually came to us and said, what do you feel about Russia being disconnected from SWIFT? Because they're still looking to do business with Russia. In fact, we just put up an article where they're basically saying, no, we in Europe do not want to die for Kiev. We've got to come up with a solution. Russia has to be part of it. And Kiev is going to have to back down. So Europe has definitely abandoned the U.S. agenda to provoke a conflict with Russia. Let's hear it for those Europeans. All right, I see we've got a caller on the line. Unfortunately, we're about ready to take a break for commercial, so I'm going to ask John in South Carolina to be patient for 4 minutes, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're just now getting word that the House of Representatives has voted 270 to 152 to pass the Keystone XL pipeline bill. Senate already passed it a while back. So now it's going to go to the White House. Obama, of course, has already said he will veto this measure. And it looks like the House, at least, is very close to a supermajority needed to overturn a presidential veto. And Obama's coattails are not as long as they used to be on Capitol Hill, so we'll see what's going to happen with that. All righty, we're going to grab another phone call here. John in South Carolina. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. It's actually Sean. No worries. Long-time listener, first-time caller. I just really quick wanted to get your weigh in on the YouTube channel I frequent. It's Ron Gibson. He posts your material daily. And there's a lot of very interesting discourse that goes on in the comments. Obviously, there's a lot of useful idiots on there chiming in with their 2 cents. And I'm going to hop off there and listen to what you have to say. I love what you're doing. Love your show. Hope to talk to you soon, Mike, and have a great day.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. I'm unfamiliar with the YouTube channel, and but as a general rule of thumb, everybody needs to understand that the Internet, the independent media, is now the high ground in the war for the minds of the American people. And the same government that basically took covert control of all the corporate media, TV news, magazines, newspapers, through programs like Mockingbird, are now trying to do the same here on the Internet. But because there are so many originating sources for information, it's too expensive to try and go out and co-opt them all. But they do maintain these large forces of paid propagandists who prowl around websites trying to control the discussion in the comments section on various articles. Now, articles that are really contentious, these days the comments are usually shut off. So when you have somebody who's in there who is hurling abuse and names and saying, the Muslims are all bad, and you may be talking to somebody who's a paid propagandist. And I wrote a story a while back called The Parable of the Taco Stand and the Pizza Parlor, which basically said, if you've got taco lovers and pizza lovers, and they're all happy in their own respective establishments, does it make sense for a taco lover to come into the pizza parlor and start screaming that all the pizza eaters are stupid? And no, it doesn't, unless this taco lover is actually working for the taco stand, trying to shift the market. And so if you are in a discussion about a particular topic and there's somebody in there who's just doing nothing but name-calling and insulting everybody for being there, who doesn't seem to have any interest in the topic at all, you're probably dealing with a paid propagandist. The U.S. military maintains this capability. Corporate public relations firms openly advertise this as a service on their websites. Israel has the megaphone system. It's big business, and unfortunately, it is a reminder that there are far too many people in our culture who, for their 30 pieces of silver, will go on out and post lies to the web because, hey, we're on the good guy's side, and, these other delusions. And as Stalin said, they're just useful idiots doing this stuff. Getting back to the economy, Russia is scheduled to take over the presidency of BRICS Business Council as of April 1. So they're going to be in even firmer control of the BRICS organization. And despite its name, which stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, there are now more than 80 nations who have signed on. It is a major bloc. They're forming alliances with the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, with the Central Asian Economic Co-op, I guess they're calling it. The de-dollarization of the world is proceeding apace, and that's why the U.S. government is in a panic to get war going anywhere, so they can blow up anybody who dares use the U.S. dollar, who dares sell their resources for anything other than the dollar, and make a bloody example of them, even though the bloody examples in Iraq and Libya haven't convinced anybody. By the way, over the last break, I posted a few more stories about this Canada lawsuit, and hopefully not all those links are being blocked, although I'm sure Canada's censorship is probably looking at my website for everything I post on it to add it to the ban list up there. But I'm still getting emails from people in Canada saying there's an absolute government-mandated blackout. They don't want the Canadian people to know how the Canadian government literally betrayed them, costing them billions and billions in interest payments that weren't necessary. Because those banks that are making all that interest, they're very generous donors before every Canadian election. And Canada's government doesn't want the Canadian people to know about that, because the Canadian people might get upset. Alrighty, article out of RINF.com, Why Public Banks Outperform Private Banks. Unfair competition or a better mousetrap? Actually, it's because you don't have a top level of money junkies siphoning everything out of there as fast as it comes in. But they're talking basically about this article that was in the Wall Street Journal last November, talking about how the Bank of North Dakota, which is the nation's only state-owned bank, is more profitable than Goldman Sachs, has a better credit rating than J.P. Morgan Chase, and hasn't seen profit growth drop since 2003. Private central banks do not exist to serve the people and the nation. They serve themselves. And they profit by corrupting the elected government, which is full of people ready and willing to be corrupted. That's what it comes down to. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve is now drawing up the battle lines against Rand Paul's Audit the Fed legislation. This was an issue that was championed by his father, Ron Paul. And the Federal Reserve has come out to say as much as if a full audit is attempted, they will crash the economy. Because, like Canada's bank, they don't want you to know how badly you have been cheated and defrauded by this practice of the U.S. federal government going to the Federal Reserve to borrow money at interest when the Constitution allows the federal government to create and issue its own debt-free currency. Why are they doing this? Well, because that private central bank makes trillions of dollars off this scam, and they turn around and they write checks full of millions of dollars for these politicians every election. That's it in a nutshell. There is no other possible reason for the federal government to borrow at interest money created out of thin air by the Federal Reserve when the Constitution gives the federal government the authority to create their own. Now, I'd like to point out something else here. Under the Constitution of the United States of America, only the government has the authority to make monetary policy, not a privately owned central bank. And because the Constitution does not authorize the delegation or transfer of that authority, it would require a constitutional amendment to do so, passed by both houses of Congress, signed by the President, ratified by 3/4 of the states. The Federal Reserve Act is unconstitutional. The Federal Reserve is unconstitutional. And the immense debt which we are told we owe this privately owned central bank is basically null and void. It is odious. It was created through fraud and violation of the Constitution. And they don't want you to know that. Just like the government of Canada is trying to keep the truth from their people. Anyway. Let's see. Over the past 8 years, going back to that crash of 2008, global debt has risen 17% faster than gross domestic product. Yeah, it's designed that way. When you have a private central bank issuing all the public currency as a loan at interest, debt grows faster than the available money supply. It is intended that way. It's a trap to enslave you to permanently unpayable debt. So yeah, of course the debt's growing faster than the available money supply, faster than the gross domestic product. It's supposed to. It's designed that way. Anyway. Apparently, Barclays Bank is now kicking out customers who make less than £75,000 a year. You're just beneath our notice. You don't have enough money to be worth our paperwork. Boy, talk about an attitude problem. All right, we got to take a break for news, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is still in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in, and I'm continuing to get emails from listeners and readers up in Canada, and somebody tried to do a search on CBC's own website for Bank of Canada lawsuit and came up with 2 results completely irrelevant. So there's an absolute total ordered by the banksters, ordered by the government blackout on this story in Canada. Now, over at our little online store, we sell a coffee mug that says the fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force them to act like one where everybody can see it. And the people of Canada are now seeing it fully on display. Alrighty. Now, here in the United States of America, the government is dead broke, and they're doing anything they can to grab money. And it's created a bit of a problem because they have all these civil forfeiture laws where they can go out and just take wealth away from people just on the suspicion that maybe kind of sort of down the road they might do something wrong with it, or maybe, even though we don't know it for a fact, they may have done something wrong to get the money. And they grab it, and it's up to the former owner to prove that they, acquired the wealth honestly and did not intend to do something bad with it. This is a return to the Napoleonic Code, where guilt is the presumption, and the burden of proof to prove innocence falls on the victim. And apparently, the federal government is executing a lot of civil forfeiture over what is being called structuring. And that is because if you make a deposit to your bank for over $10,000, the bank has to report that to the government to make sure that you are not engaged in something nefarious. And because people got very nervous about that, they started putting in their bank deposits in smaller amounts, which the government declared to be structuring. You're putting in smaller deposits to evade us. And now that is considered grounds for seizing bank accounts. because you're putting in only $9,000, and a few days later you put in $8,000. And it's created a huge scandal because they're not actually getting terrorists or money launderers or drug lords. They're shutting down cash-based businesses like restaurants and stores who do multiple deposits in small amounts because that's the way it comes into their business. Remember, the last official act of any government is to loot the nation, and we're there. Now, do you remember Halliburton? They're one of the war profiteering companies going all the way back to the second invasion of Iraq, probably the first invasion of Iraq, and now they have hit hard times. Despite all the warmongering going on all over the globe, they're getting ready to let go of 6,500 people. Alrighty. Very interesting story over in Blacklisted News, and this is a problem. Surveys are showing that 72% of all Americans are feeling stress from their financial situation, not being able to pay the bills in a timely manner, feeling the press of debt. And 31% say it adds to relationship conflict. And that is absolutely true. The three biggest threats to any relationship are money pressures, sexual issues, or dependency on some recreational substance. And it is a real problem here because we have another story over at Oraz.com. Unemployment is a cause of 45,000 suicides every year. This is according to the Lancet. But as long as the bankers are happy, who cares, really? Let them commit suicide. We won't have to give them food stamps or benefits or anything. If they're working and productive, keep them alive, and if they're not, just let them go. By the way, food stamp beneficiaries here in the United States of America have been above 46 million for 39 straight months. Greatest nation on earth, huh? And so not surprisingly, over at Sputnik News, they're reporting that a record number of Americans gave up their U.S. citizenship in 2014. The brain drain is on. The best and the brightest are getting out of this country while they can. And if you are young and have children and the means to do so, I think it's a good idea. Before your kids wind up carrying an M16 and breathing depleted uranium dust in between all those very powerful psychotropic drugs they're giving our troops to make them more effective killers here. Alrighty, so, and I know I've been mentioning this during the show, but one more time, the case to reinstate the Bank of Canada, and is talking about the Comer lawsuit, and it's getting zero media coverage. Now, the deal is that unlike the Federal Reserve, the Central Bank of Canada is, at least officially, owned by the Canadian people. And part of its charter was, as the issuing authority for Canada's money, that they would provide interest-free loans to the federal, provincial, and municipal governments of Canada for infrastructure development. But starting in 1974, the Canadian government started borrowing that money at interest from private banks. And that saddled the Canadian taxpayer with having to pay the interest on those loans. Why did they do that? Well, because those private banks, they write very generous campaign donation checks every election. I ran a search on Google for this story, and it only came back with one result, which is the article in Global Research up in Canada, which I guess they figure they can't block that one without it being really obvious. That's what they're doing. But this is a pattern that we're seeing here in the United States of America, up in Canada, probably pretty much everywhere else is a private central bank. Instead of having interest-free money for developing the nation, the governments are borrowing that money at interest from private banks and just saying, you will pay the interest. And there's no reason to do that other than the politicians get a piece of the action through campaign donations. I can understand why the government of Canada is panicked about this. There is no way that they could explain to the Canadian people why it was preferable to borrow money at interest from private bankers when the charter for the Bank of Canada says that they have to provide those loans interest-free. There's no way to explain that to the Canadian people. And here in the United States of America, we've got to keep asking that question. They're getting ready to debate raising the U.S. debt ceiling. There shouldn't be a debt ceiling. The Constitution gives the government the authority to create and issue debt-free money. Spend it into circulation to buy what the government needs. It flows through commerce without accruing interest, is taxed back at the end of the cycle in the same amount to balance the books. And that's it. The federal government's allowed to do that. So why are they borrowing money from the Federal Reserve at interest and sticking future generations of Americans with that ruinous debt? Because the Federal Reserve writes big campaign donation checks. That's it, in a nutshell. And just like the Canadian government couldn't possibly explain why they're doing what they're doing to the Canadian people, Washington, D.C. can't explain why they're borrowing money from the Federal Reserve at interest when they're allowed to make their own by the Constitution interest-free. It's all just ink and paper. It's all created out of thin air. It's just a giant scam to make themselves rich at your expense. Alrighty, we're coming on down here to another break here. Apparently Obama is out there slamming Staples for mandating 25-hour work weeks for all their employees to avoid the Affordable Care Act. And when we come back from this commercial break, I got a little response to that. America, welcome back to the show here. Now, I have often said that our best hope to avoid a new world war is that all of these leaders are still playing the propaganda game by the rules that worked in the 1950s and 1960s, and they just don't understand how the Internet has fundamentally changed the way information flows through society, and I have an example. I'm looking at the story over at Sputnik News about how Poroshenko is bringing a fragment of a shell to the meeting at Minsk to prove Russia has invaded Ukraine. And it's specifically part of a cluster munition from the BM-30 Smerch missile launcher. And he's out there saying, see, the Russians are here, the Russians are here. It took me exactly 30 seconds to find on Wikipedia, no less, that Ukraine not only has the BM-30, but it's documented they've been using it against Donbass. Remember what I said before? In the age of the Internet, the lifespan of a government lie can be clocked with an egg timer. I got to get an egg timer in here to use. And so there it is. Kiev has these. Kiev has been using them against the civilians in the eastern Ukraine. And Poroshenko picked up a shell fragment, took it to Minsk and say, see, this proves Putin is there. No, it doesn't. Getting really they're making reckless, foolish lies. It's too easy to expose at this point. Anyway, I wanted to get back to this thing about Staples. Earlier in the week, Staples announced that they were enforcing a policy of 25-hour work weeks on all of their employees. They didn't want them getting anywhere near that 30-hour week, which would trigger the requirement for the Affordable Care Act. And Obama basically has come out saying, a shame on Staples. Come on, that's not a lot of money. You know, you're a big corporation. You can well afford to pay ACA. No, they can't, Mr. President. American businesses have been hovering on the edge of collapse since before Obamacare. Higher costs will and are driving many of them over the edge into bankruptcy and closure. And when you add the fact that the Obamacare-compliant health insurance isn't worth the paper it's written on, means Americans who've been forced to buy those policies are also being driven into bankruptcy by the unpaid portions of their medical bills. Now, the problem that we have here is that Washington, D.C. and Wall Street are still laboring under this delusion that there is still vast amounts of wealth out here in the hinterland, and all they have to do is figure out some new clever way to scam it out of us, and they'll be richer tomorrow than they are today. But the reality is the well is dry, the barn is empty, the cookie jar has no more to give. And until they are willing to realize that the wealth is in fact too concentrated in too few hands, the economy will stagnate. Obamacare is a disaster, and still they will not quit because they can't admit error or failure or mistake. We'll do it for them, of course. Here's an article over an Investment Watch blog. Barack Obama's policies for 6 years have brought neither peace nor prosperity. Period. End of discussion. There it is. The last 6 years have been a disaster for the United States of America and its people. And I'm not saying that the years prior to that were any better. But remember when Obama was campaigning on hope and change and I'm going to reverse the Bush policies, and none of that happened. Just more of the same. Different feces, no, same feces, different sphincter. Now here's a very interesting story. This is out of Washington Times. Apparently the federal government is funding a brand new bureaucracy to deal with the Obama amnesty applications coming in from all the amnestied illegal immigrants. And they're going to be working 2 shifts, from 6 in the morning till just before midnight every workday to keep up with all the paperwork coming in from the illegal immigrants. Isn't it funny how they can come up with the money for a bureaucracy to handle all the illegal immigrants, but they couldn't come up with the money to close the borders? Anyway. Story out of Russia Today. Discontent with Washington, U.S. states look to nullify federal laws. More and more states are passing laws that simply say the federal government doesn't have authority here. Whether it's relative to gun laws, whether it's out in places like Utah and Nevada, taking back control of their public lands, which belong to the states, not the federal government. And the 10th Amendment Center, Mike Mahari, is saying people feel the federal government is trying to do too much, it's too big, and it's getting more and more in debt, which is all true. It's totally out of control. I agree with the wisdom of the Founding Fathers. That government governs best that governs least. And now we're in a state where the dictator's wife tells families what their children will eat for school lunch, and it's not particularly good. Now, there's a story that's been floating around the net, and I wasn't going to deal with it, but it keeps getting sent to me, and so I'm going to mention it. The version I'm looking at appeared in governmentslaves.info. Hawaiian independence movement attracts Chinese interest. And the story is basically that some of our sovereign groups here in the state of Hawaii, who would like their state back from the United States, now that the United States has admitted that they stole the place. And the story here is that Chinese are coming in here and offering support and weapons to kick out the American people. And I want to put the scotch on that one right now because I have a lot of contacts in the independence movement here in Hawaii. Nobody has heard word one about any offers from China to come in and help kick out the U.S. government. I think this is more China bashing, or it's trying to demonize the independence movement. But there's absolutely nothing to this story that I can find. And by the way, the Hawaiian sovereignty movement, by and large, doesn't want to kick anybody out. They're perfectly willing that everybody go on living here. They're perfectly willing for the United States to go on using Pearl Harbor as long as they're willing to pay a reasonable rent for the facility. But the reality is, the U.S. government admits stealing Hawaii away from its own people. And to make amends, now they want to declare the indigenous Hawaiians to be another Indian tribe and give them a reservation on some piece of Kahulawi that nobody wants because it's full of unexploded munitions from training flights. And for this native Hawaiian people, that's really not a decent offer at all here. Alrighty, we're coming up here on another commercial break. And when we come on back, we're going to be talking about human-caused global warming. Well, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we get back to the news here, I want to share a little kind of a personal story because during the remainder of this show, you're probably going to hear some noise in the background. The neighboring unit is being completely refurbished. The last tenants there, well, it's an ugly story. It involves drug dealing and all kinds of other things. And they had a ficus tree in the backyard that was threatening the building and a plumeria tree, and they were going to take down the ficus leave the plume area, but I guess somebody made the decision. They're just tearing it all out of there. So there's a chainsaw operating right outside my window that you're probably going to be hearing there in the background, along with thumps and clumps and the rest of it here. But all of a sudden, we have a view to the west from our back porch area, and actually it's rather pretty. And for somebody who does a lot of astronomy at night, all of a sudden I got a lot more sky to look at here. I remember we had this comet come through, and I couldn't see it from the backyard, and I had to go up the street. Anyway, enough of this lollygagging here. Now, even the SRN Newsbreak acknowledged this. There is a new cold system coming in, at least 2 more major snowstorms headed for the East Coast here. Now remember, on the calendar, spring is just 3 weeks away. Story out of Freep.com. Super freeze headed this way, minus 25 degrees wind chill. Snowstorm barrage to persist in eastern New England. This is from AccuWeather. And they're calling it the Alberta Clipper, the Arctic coming from down from Canada. It's all the Canadians' fault here, something like that. Warning about travel delays and all kinds of other problems. I love this headline out of the Washington Post. No end in sight. Winter storms, brutal cold, and wind lined up for Boston area. They've already got between 5 and 7 feet of snow so far. They are breaking all-time snow records all over that part of the country here. Now, here's a very interesting article. This is, again, from AccuWeather. Boston turns to snow farms and melting trucks in desperate effort to unclog city streets. They've got so much snow to remove. It's not like you come to with a snow plow and it puts it up on the side and the road is open. There is so much snow, they're having to pick it up and truck it to special designated areas where they're just going to pile it up into this huge snow mountain. And they did that last year, and some of those snow mountains didn't even melt all the way through summer. And it's, again, all-time snow records, unprecedented amount of snow. And back in 2000, the carbon Nazis were saying snowfalls are now a thing of the past. Now, there's a bit of a stink over the Metropolitan Boston Transportation Authority, which actually had to suspend service because of how heavy the snow was. And Governor Charlie Baker just said, you're supposed to keep the trains and buses running here. And the general manager, Beverly Scott, basically came back and said, you have to give us the money to deal with these hard winters that we have had for several years now. And I'm sure the reply is going to be, but Al Gore said that snow and ice are a thing of the past, so we spent the money on new office furniture. And we're seeing this all over the Northern Hemisphere. All these local jurisdictions were just being assured by the corporate media and the government that winters were going to be mild. Remember back in 2009, the UK Met Office predicted a snow-free winter, and they got socked in, hammered. That's what you get for listening to politicians. They're not going to tell you the truth. They're going to tell you whatever is going to get your obedience and your money from you. Alrighty, over in Connecticut at ctnow.com. More snow, bitter cold, and upcoming forecast. They're only looking at 3 inches of snow, but they're really talking about the cold here. Bitter cold and wind expected at Saturday's Vasa. This is over in Michigan. And they're looking at a wind chill warning of minus 25. This is from the National Weather Service, acknowledging how cold it's getting. Wisconsin, Arctic front bringing in bitter cold later Wednesday. And there are 2 more storms aimed at the New England area, and they're big ones. And they might not even be the last ones here. Down in North Carolina, bitter cold nights with wind chills in single digits forecast for Piedmont Triad. Oh, and by the way, the Senate Committee on Global Warming has had to postpone their meeting due to the snow. Yes, we're having a conference on global warming. We're going to have to postpone it because the snow won't let us get to it. I love that one here. All righty then. Now then. A federal district court over in Texas has ruled that residency requirements for pistol purchases are unconstitutional. This is a direct state-level challenge to U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder, who has argued that the federal ban on handguns outside a person's state of residence doesn't violate the Second Amendment. Yes, Holder, it does. Holder was trying to put in this idea that if you live in a state and you buy a gun and you leave the state, you have to leave the gun behind, which generally is kind of a good idea, unless you're... But this idea that the federal government can literally say you're not allowed to take your gun out of your home state, that is a violation of the Second Amendment. They're scared of you. Do you realize how scared they are of you? We're not even at the flaming torches and pitchforks stage, and they're out there trying to figure some way they can disarm us all. So then they can come for the gold, and they can come for your sons and daughters from our wars, and you can't say no to them, which is the very reason the Founding Fathers gave you that Second Amendment. It's not about hunting. It's not about target shooting. It is about reminding the federal government that they are supposed to work for us, not the other way around. Now, it looks like Brian Williams over at NBC, except he's not going to be there for at least 6 months, maybe permanent, is starting a trend, because over in Great Britain, one of their Channel 4 news presenters, Kathy Newman, has now been forced to apologize and retract a story where she had claimed she had visited a mosque and then been ushered out, forcibly ejected. And the mosque came back with their closed-circuit TV security camera footage showing that she just walked out on her own. Whoopsie! And we need to keep pointing these things out, because Brian Williams and now this lady and all the other things, the American people, the people of Britain, are beginning to wake up and realize that those corporate media organizations are not about telling you anything true. They're there to sell you something. Sell you vaccines, sell you human-caused global warming, sell you the need for war, sell you a candidate, sell you a new car. That's what they're in the business of doing. Back when I was teaching, I used to ask my class, what is it the TV networks sell? And they said, well, hair cream, gel, toothpaste. No, that's not what they sell. What the TV networks sell is an audience, lured in with entertaining, we hope, programming, and left in a receptive state of mind for those commercials. That's what TV sells. You. You are the stock and trade of the TV networks. Interesting little story about the original Star Trek. The reason it was canceled after 3 years, it had very high ratings, but the problem was the stories were so engaging, people would talk about them through the commercials, and they couldn't find advertisers. So Star Trek's 5-year mission ended after just 3 years here. Okay. Let's see. A court has ruled that the Occupy Houston assassination plot records are exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. This is where the FBI acknowledged there was an assassination plot, but won't provide any information about it because apparently some of the plotters were undercover FBI informants. Possibly it was the FBI's own plot. We'll never know. The courts are saying, yes, they can keep secrets from you. You can't keep secrets from the government, but the government must keep secrets from you. That's what democracy is. And if you believe that, when I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of the program today here. I'm looking at this chart produced by the Wall Street Journal. Apparently, recruiting agencies are reporting an increasing shortage of skilled candidates in a lot of fields. And I was looking here, and engineering design is one of them, generalist, marketing and creative. And I understand what's going on because here in Hawaii, we used to have a lot of people involved in the film industry, animation, game development, and they've all gone to greener pastures in other countries. A lot of them went down to New Zealand, work at Weta, or Australia, booming film industry in Sydney. The skilled, knowledgeable people are getting out of this country, and we're bringing in all these illegal immigrants who don't know how to do anything, and we think this economy is going to recover. I don't think so. Now, getting on to spies and spying here. Interesting little story over at newsforage.com. Over in California, a judge has now ruled that citizens cannot sue the National Security Agency to stop spying, and went further to say that you can't sue the NSA for secretly spying on you unless you prove personally you've been secretly spied on. Which, of course, they're not going to tell you that. And we've been talking about smart TV spying on people. There's an article over at the Daily Mail in Great Britain reminding everybody that the Xbox game system could be snooping on you, because the console's Kinect device is constantly listening to your voice, listening for commands, and capable of recording or interpreting and sending all of that information back up that internet connection. And here's where it gets really interesting. We were talking yesterday about just sticking a piece of tape over the camera that's on the smart TV. And there's an interesting article in Slate saying that if you go into your smart TV to try and disable the eavesdropping system, you would be technically guilty of a felony under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Because part of the law is you're not allowed to tinker with the electronics in your TV because you might be trying to illegally copy the software. No, I'm just trying to throw it out. Isn't that interesting? When I was a kid and you bought something like a TV, you could do whatever you wanted with it. Fix it up, augment it. If you wrecked it, your own problem. Now we live in a country where you buy a television set, you bring it into your home, and it is against the law for you to open it up to make changes. That's how far down the path of dictatorship we have come. Apparently, Samsung is now dealing with another scandal. In addition to peeking at you and listening to you, apparently Samsung TVs are now inserting advertisements into your movies. So if you thought you had recorded a commercial-free movie on your digital box, or you were paying for a commercial-free movie from your cable service, wrong again. Samsung Smart TVs are interrupting your movies that you bought and paid for with ads. That is just tacky. I'm sorry, that's just tacky. Alrighty, another little article. This is from Blacklisted News talking about the Flame virus and asking, did the NSA, Israel, and the UK spy agency launch a joint cyber attack on Iran? Yeah, they did, and the US helped. But they have a new NSA document with additional information about what was going on. And the one I'm more concerned about than Flame is Stuxnet, because that one broke into the wild, was targeted on Iran's uranium processing facility, hacked into those Siemens industrial controllers, which are standard, they're ubiquitous all over the world, to break them, to try and break the centrifuge, trigger a radiation release so all the people around that plant would come down sick. And the Stuxnet broke into the wild. It not only got into the uranium processing plant, it walked out of it, possibly on somebody's flash drive. They put the drive into their computer at home. It went out on the net. It was wrecking factories all over Asia. It was in Japan. It was documented to be in computers around the Fukushima power plant before the earthquake and tsunami struck. We know that Fukushima power plant was using the same Siemens industrial controllers as Iran was. It's one of their standard uses. And we know that during that disaster, the safety systems at Fukushima did not operate the way they were supposed to. Something was keeping them from working. And it took a disaster and made it a catastrophe. Now, unfortunately, it's been a lot of years, and we don't know how radiation affects the non-volatile memories in those Siemens controllers. But if I had had anything to do with the investigation of Fukushima, I would have done a memory dump on all of those Siemens controllers to see if Stuxnet was in there. But the people who are launching these cyber weapons, it's just not a concern. They just want to have victory, and if it causes disaster someplace else, not my problem. They just got in the way. Same thing we saw with this oil price war. The U.S. wanted to get Russia and just didn't care how it was going to hurt the shale oil industry, Canada's oil economy, Alaska's oil economy, Venezuela's oil economy. Collateral damage. We don't care about them. Alrighty, talking about vaccines again, story out of Activist Post. Investigative journalist Cheryl Atkinson, who is now basically able to say whatever she wants to say, free of a corporate media leash, and is out there saying, you got to face up to the truth about the vaccines. This year's flu vaccine is a total failure even by conventional standards. It's a major scandal at the CDC that they continue to promote people buying it, sticking it in their bodies when it doesn't seem to work and may actually cause the disease. Same thing with the measles vaccine. Really is. Now then, another story from Investment Watch blog. People receiving the CDC's recommended doses of the measles vaccine are still getting and passing on the measles. Okay? This has led to another article over at Activist Post. CDC wants to infect adults with measles. They need some kind of an illness marching across the country to sell their products. And remember, when they start yelling at us older people, get your measles vaccine. I've had the measles. I had it as a kid. I'm immune. I don't need a measles vaccine. I'm not going to get it again. I can't pass it on. Now, Japan actually quit the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine 7 years ago. They had a 4-year experiment of mandatory MMR vaccines, and it had serious financial and human costs, and Japan quit it. They're the only developed nation to have abandoned the MMR vaccine. They also mandate GMO labeling. I'm starting to think the government of Japan really cares about the Japanese people. What a novel attitude to see in a modern government, actually caring about their people, worried about their health. Wow, we need some of that in this country, I think, here. Speaking of Japan, the news is not all good. They have been working on this plan to try and build cement barricades to try and prevent the contaminated water from getting out of the reactor buildings, and it's not working, which we kind of knew because the water's just going to go down below the cement wall and percolate out through the soil into the ocean, seep up through the seafloor. It's porous. And they're kind of they don't know how they're going to decommission those reactors anymore here. Another story coming out of the Daily Mail. Apparently, green energy firms have been accused of deliberately making wind turbines less efficient so they could appear weak enough to win small business fund financing. In other words, we could build something that really works, but we're going to build something that sort of doesn't work because then we get a government handout. The whole windmill solar, remember Solyndra in this country? It was just a giveaway to political supporters. There's the music. I need to get out of here, get some animation work done this afternoon. We will be back tomorrow, Thursday, here on the Genesis Communication Network. I need all of you. This is a call to Rivero's Rangers to get out there and share whatreallyhappened.com, Genesis Communication on all of your social media. We need to reach more people and wake them up to what's going on before we start having mushrooms sprouting outside all of our windows. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.